Women took the sexual offensive that fall and told us all about it. And they made The Joy of Sex the #1 bestseller.
Let's get it on.
It focused graphically on the ecstasies of the bedroom, never mind burning the roast. The novel Fear of Flying, published that November, was as unbridled and raunchy as Henry Miller in his heyday, and it was written by a woman, Erica Jong.
Here was a woman writing frankly about female anger, about female passion, about the forbidden feelings about a mother, a father, sibling rivalry. These were all the things that good girls were not supposed to talk about. And we were still in the grip of good girlism in 1973. We forget how quickly all of that has changed.
Walter, I am free. I am free as a bird. I am Maud Livingston Seagull.
Of course, women could afford to be candid, having little or no power to lose. Those with the most to lose, men I mean, were using their power to keep their power and their secrets. Erica Jong's book was nothing compared to Richard Nixon's tapes. Come back to 60 Days in Autumn, 1973, when the pursuit of power collides with the law of the land.
Come back to the fall of '73.
Welcome back to the fall of 1973, to a 60-day period when power was sought, found, and frustrated. Earlier tonight, we saw the pursuit of power in the Middle East burst into war, and women trying to accustom themselves to their newfound power, trying to get comfortable with more liberty, more independence. Now we come to Washington, where the pursuit of power is always naked and unashamed. By the fall of '73, a scandal that had begun 15 months earlier with a little burglary at Democratic National Headquarters had grown into a cancer that had reached the White House, with the president himself fighting for his political survival.
In a very short time, Watergate went from being the name of a building where a burglary was bungled to a code word for constitutional crisis. Actually, Watergate is simple. It's only one story, played over and over in different circumstances. But always it's a story about cheating to win and lying when caught. Sadly, the liars and cheaters happen to be running the country. The background is this. In response to allegations that the White House was participating in a cover-up of the Watergate burglary, the Senate began the Watergate hearings in May, with Senator Sam Ervin as its chairman. As more information came to light, the men closest to the president began to topple. Nixon was forced to accept the resignations of his two top aides, Bob Haldeman, White House Chief of Staff, and John Ehrlichman, White House Domestic Advisor. They were under investigation by both the Senate and a federal grand jury. In May, former Attorney General John Mitchell was indicted for perjury and obstruction of justice. And John Dean, special counsel to the president, was fired by Nixon. He would tell the Watergate Committee that the president was aware of the cover-up as early as 1972. What did you know, and when did you know it? That was the question. And one day, the answer was, I knew it because it was on the tapes. What tapes? The tapes the president made of everything said in his office. I see. Clearly a matter for a special prosecutor.
Or to substitute my own...
Back in May, Attorney General Elliot Richardson had appointed his old Harvard law professor, Archibald Cox, as special prosecutor, and told Cox to investigate Watergate with a free hand.
What if, in Senator Byrd's words, this trail leads into the Oval Office at the White House?
Well, as I replied then, the trail should be followed wherever it leads.
Cox, a preeminent constitutional lawyer, hires a staff of eager young attorneys, sets up shop in a Washington office building, and starts following the Watergate trail. In July, Cox issues a subpoena for the Oval Office tapes. President Nixon refuses to hand them over. Cox seeks a court order. In early October, unrelated chicanery staggers the nation. Wednesday, October 10th.
Vice President Spiro Agnew resigned today, the first man holding his high office to do so under fire.
Implicated in bribery and extortion, Agnew was charged only with income tax evasion. He pleaded no contest. Elliot Richardson worked out the deal.
I had been talking to the president about the terms of Agnew's resignation. The president said, well, now we have that out of the way, we can go on and do something about getting rid of Cox.
The White House, which hadn't wanted any special prosecutor, finds itself with a nemesis. Pat Buchanan was President Nixon's speechwriter.
The feeling among us in the White House, certainly many, was that Archibald Cox was an out-and-out partisan, that Archibald Cox was going to make his reputation on this, that an endless prosecutorial investigation of the White House was an intolerable state of affairs, that it had to be cut.
One of the things I never could get across to the White House was that Archie Cox would rather cut off his right arm than just to make a case for any reasons of purely personal animosity.
Friday, October 12th. Cox wins his case. Nixon must hand over the tapes or appeal to the Supreme Court. He has 1 week to make up his mind. Monday, October 15th. Nixon and his Chief of Staff, Alexander Haig, come up with a slick maneuver disguised as a compromise. Cox will get no tapes. Instead, he will get a summary of their contents, verified independently. But he must not request any further evidence. Cox's press secretary was James Doyle.
What they could never have gotten Archibald Cox to do was to say, I won't ask for anything more.
For a week, the facade is serene. But beneath the serenity, there are secret meetings, phone calls, letters between Cox and the White House, with Elliot Richardson shuttling back and forth. The White House is adamant. They will not give up the tapes. They want Cox out, and they assume that Elliot Richardson will back them up.
They were not, in fact, really negotiating. They wanted to get rid of Cox somehow, but that in order to get rid of Cox and get away with it, they had to have me out front, justifying it to the American people.
Friday, the court's deadline day. Nixon must fish or cut bait. Cox's deputy was Henry Ruth.
I think, of course, by that night, it was inevitable that a confrontation was coming. It was only a question of when, how, and the result.
Fearing a White House takeover, Cox's staff takes steps to protect the evidence on the advice of attorney Carl Feldbaum.
Some made copies of everything in their files. I remember a few people taping them rather melodramatically to their legs and to their chests and walking out, crinkling.
The White House does not give up the tapes, does not appeal to the Supreme Court, does not even ask for an extension of the deadline. Instead, it announces that Senator John Stennis will listen to an expurgated summary of the tapes and verify it, and Archibald Cox is to ask for nothing more.
I don't think I gave any serious thought to simply complying with his order. Well, I wasn't going to simply, in effect, call off the investigation.
This is Jim Doyle from Archibald Cox's office. I have a statement that I'm going to read as fast as you can take it. It's from Special Prosecutor Archibald Cox. In my judgment, the President is refusing to comply with the court decrees, period.
Given Cox's opposition, the President may have no alternative but to fire him and to risk the consequences.